Steve Harvey had witnessed thousands of emotional moments during his years hosting Family Feud. He had seen families celebrate victories, share tears of joy, and experience the full range of human emotion that comes with competition and connection. But what happened on a cold January afternoon in 2025 would leave him speechless in a way nothing else ever had. The moment when a husband laughed at his crying wife would reveal something so disturbing that Steve would be forced to make a choice between continuing the show and defending basic human decency. If you believe that compassion and empathy are the foundation of any loving relationship, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. What you are about to witness will change how you think about emotional support in marriage. Peterson family from Des Moines, Iowa stood ready to compete, their matching blue sweaters giving them a coordinated appearance. Leading the family was 46-year-old David Peterson, a financial analyst whose confident smile suggested someone comfortable in the spotlight. Beside him stood his wife of 23 years, Linda Peterson, a 44-year-old elementary school teacher whose nervous energy was visible even from across the stage. Their 3 children completed the lineup. 19-year-old daughter Jessica was home from college for the taping. 16-year-old son Matthew stood beside his sister, and 14-year-old daughter Ashley completed the family group. On the surface, they appeared to be a typical American family, excited for their moment on national television. The opposing family, the Garcias from Houston, Texas, brought an entirely different energy to the stage. Warm and expressive, they greeted Steve with genuine enthusiasm and seemed thrilled just to be part of the experience. Steve Harvey began the introductions with his trademark warmth, moving down the Peterson family line. When he reached Linda, he immediately noticed her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the podium. "Linda Peterson, welcome to Family Feud," Steve said with a reassuring smile. "Are you nervous?" Linda laughed self-consciously. "Very nervous, Mr. Harvey. I have never been on television before. I'm afraid I will say something silly and embarrass my family." Before Steve could offer words of encouragement, David Peterson chimed in with a laugh. "Oh, she will definitely say something silly. Linda gets flustered easily. We are all prepared for some entertainment." The comment landed awkwardly. Steve paused, his smile tightening slightly, but he moved forward with the introductions, assuming it was just nervous banter between spouses. The game began, and for the first few rounds, everything proceeded normally. The Peterson family was doing well, answering questions correctly and building points. But then came the moment that would change everything. It was Linda's turn at the podium for a face-off question against the Garcia family matriarch. Steve read the question slowly and clearly. "Name something people are afraid of that starts with the letter S." Linda rang in first, her hand hitting the buzzer a split second before her opponent. The pressure of being first, combined with the cameras and the live audience, seemed to overwhelm her. She opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. The seconds ticked by as she visibly struggled to form words. "Take your time," Steve said gently, trying to ease her anxiety. Finally, Linda blurted out an answer. "Spiders." It was a perfectly reasonable answer. Steve smiled and turned to the board. "Spiders, good answer." The board revealed that spiders was indeed the #1 answer. The audience applauded enthusiastically. But Linda, overwhelmed by relief and the release of tension, did something unexpected. She started crying, not gentle tears, but full sobbing. Her shoulders shook as she covered her face with her hands, the emotion of the moment completely overtaking her. Steve immediately moved toward her, concerned. Hey, it is okay. You got the #1 answer. You did great." But then something happened that made Steve freeze in his tracks. David Peterson, standing just a few feet away from his crying wife, started laughing. Not a nervous chuckle or a sympathetic laugh meant to lighten the mood. This was genuine amusement, as if his wife's breakdown was entertaining to him. "Classic Linda," David said through his laughter, his voice clearly audible through his microphone. "She always gets emotional over the smallest things, so dramatic." The studio went silent. The audience stopped clapping. The Garcia family looked shocked. Steve Harvey stood completely still, his expression transforming from concern for Linda to something much darker as he processed what he had just witnessed. Linda's crying intensified at her husband's words. She tried to compose herself, wiping frantically at her tears, her humiliation now compounding her original emotional response. Her daughter Jessica moved toward her mother, placing a protective hand on her shoulder, shooting an angry glance at her father. Steve Harvey took a deep breath, his jaw tight. For several long seconds, he simply stared at David Peterson, and those who knew Steve well recognized that look. It was the look of a man deciding whether to maintain professional composure or to address something that violated every principle he stood for. He chose to address it. Hold on, Steve said quietly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. We need to stop for a minute. He walked over to Linda first, his expression softening. Ma'am, are you okay? Can someone get her some water? A production assistant rushed over with water. Linda took it with shaking hands, still trying to regain her composure, her face red from crying and embarrassment. Once he was sure Linda was being taken care of, Steve turned to face David Peterson. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Mr. Peterson, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. Did you just laugh at your wife while she was crying? David seemed oblivious to the gravity of the situation. He shrugged, still smiling. Well, yeah. Linda gets worked up over everything. It is kind of funny, honestly. She cried when our daughter left for college. She cried at a grocery store commercial last week. It is just how she is. The audience gasped audibly. Steve Harvey closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering strength, then opened them with an intensity that made David's smile finally falter. Let me tell you something, Mr. Peterson. What I just witnessed was one of the most disturbing things I have seen in all my years of hosting this show. Your wife was having an emotional moment. She was vulnerable. She was overwhelmed. And instead of offering her comfort, instead of showing her compassion, you mocked her. You laughed at her pain. David tried to defend himself. It is not that serious. She is fine. She just gets emotional easily. She is not fine, Steve said firmly, pointing toward Linda, who was still crying quietly, now being comforted by her daughters. Look at her. Does she look fine to you? Steve walked to the center of the stage, addressing not just David, but everyone watching. Ladies and gentlemen, what you just saw is called emotional invalidation. It is when someone dismisses another person's feelings, makes them feel like their emotions are not valid, like they are being too sensitive or too dramatic. And it is one of the most damaging things you can do to someone you claim to love. He turned back to David. You said Linda gets emotional easily, like that is a character flaw. But you know what I see? I see a woman who feels things deeply. I see someone who is sensitive and caring and human. And instead of appreciating that about her, instead of creating a safe space for her to express her emotions, you mock her. You make her feel ashamed for having feelings. Linda was listening now, her tears still falling but her attention fixed on Steve's words. It was as if someone was finally giving voice to feelings she had carried for years. Do you know what happens to people who are constantly told their emotions do not matter? Steve continued, his voice rising with passion. They shut down. They stop sharing what they feel. They build walls around their hearts because it is safer than being vulnerable with someone who will only hurt them. Jessica, the eldest daughter, spoke up suddenly, her voice shaking with emotion. He does this all the time. Mom cannot express any feeling without Dad making fun of her or calling her dramatic. She has stopped telling him when she is sad or hurt because he just dismisses it. David turned to his daughter, his face reddening. Jessica, this is not the time or place for that discussion. No, sir, Steve interjected. This is exactly the time and place. Your daughter is telling you something important. The question is, are you willing to listen? Matthew, the 16-year-old son, stepped forward as well. Dad, I love you, but you need to hear this. Mom has been hurt by how you treat her emotions for years. We all see it. We have all tried to tell you, but you do not listen. Even young Ashley, at 14, found her voice. When I cry, you tell me I am being a baby. When Mom cries, you laugh at her. You make us feel like having feelings is wrong. The weight of his family's unified testimony seemed to finally penetrate David's defenses. His confident smile was completely gone now, replaced by a look of confusion and perhaps the first glimmer of awareness. Steve walked over to stand beside Linda, who had finally stopped crying and was looking at her husband with an expression that mixed hurt, hope, and exhaustion. Linda, Steve said gently, how long has this been going on? Linda's voice was quiet but steady. Since the beginning of our marriage, I learned early on that David did not like it when I cried or got upset. He would tell me I was being too sensitive, that I needed to toughen up. That real life was not a romance novel. Over the years, I just stopped sharing my feelings with him. It was easier than being made to feel foolish. She continued, her voice growing stronger. I cried when Jessica left for college because I was losing my daily time with my daughter. I cried at that commercial because it reminded me of my mother who passed away. I cried today because I was so nervous about being on television, and when I got the answer right, all that fear just released. But to David, those are all just examples of me being dramatic. Tears started flowing again, but this time they seemed different. These were tears of release, of finally being heard. I am not dramatic. I am human. I have feelings, and I am tired of being made to feel like that is a flaw. The audience was completely silent, many people openly crying themselves. The Garcia family across the stage stood with tears streaming down their faces, the mother holding her husband's hand tightly. Steve Harvey looked at David Peterson with an expression that mixed anger and sadness. Do you understand what your wife just told you? She has spent 23 years hiding her true self from you because you made it unsafe for her to be vulnerable. That is not a marriage, Mr. Peterson. That is isolation. David's face had gone pale. For the first time, he seemed to truly grasp the magnitude of what was being said. I never meant to hurt her, he said weakly. I just thought she was being overly emotional. Overly emotional, Steve repeated. There is no such thing as overly emotional. People feel what they feel. Your job as a husband is not to judge whether those feelings are valid. Your job is to support your wife, to create a safe space for her to express herself, to be her partner in navigating the full range of human experience. He continued, when Linda cries, that is not a problem you need to fix or a weakness you need to mock. That is your wife trusting you enough to be vulnerable. That is an opportunity for connection, for intimacy, for showing her that you are a safe harbor in the storms of life. And instead, you have been the storm. Steve turned to address the cameras directly. I want everyone watching to understand something. Emotional invalidation is a form of emotional abuse. It is subtle. It does not leave bruises, but it damages people just as surely as physical harm does. When you consistently dismiss someone's feelings, you are telling them they do not matter. You are teaching them not to trust themselves, not to express themselves, not to be themselves. He looked back at David. Mr. Peterson, I am going to ask you a direct question, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you love your wife? David's eyes filled with tears. Yes, I love her. I have always loved her. Then you need to show her that, not with words, but with actions. You need to make your marriage a place where she feels safe to cry, to laugh, to be angry, to be scared, to be all the things that make her human. Because right now you have created a relationship where she has to hide half of who she is to avoid being ridiculed. David turned to his wife, and for the first time since the show began, he really looked at her. Not past her, not through her, but at her. And what he saw seemed to break something open inside him. He saw the pain, the loneliness, the years of suppressed emotion. He saw the woman he loved, trapped in a marriage where she could not fully be herself. Linda, he said, his voice cracking, I am so sorry. I had no idea. I thought I was just teasing. I did not realize I was hurting you. Linda looked at her husband, years of pain and hope warring in her expression. You did know, David, I told you. So many times over the years, I told you that it hurt when you dismissed my feelings, but you did not want to hear it. You told me I was being too sensitive about being too sensitive. The truth of her words hung in the air. David had no defense because there was no defense. He had been told, and he had chosen not to listen. Steve Harvey let the moment breathe, giving the family space to process what was happening. Then he spoke again, his voice softer now but no less serious. Mr. Peterson, I am not here to destroy your marriage, but I am here to tell you that if you do not change, your marriage will destroy itself. You have a wife who loves you, who has stayed with you for 23 years despite feeling emotionally abandoned. You have children who are brave enough to tell you the truth even when it is hard. You have an opportunity right now to become the husband and father they need you to be. He paused. The question is, will you take it? David Peterson stood there, his confidence completely shattered, facing the reality of the pain he had caused. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I want to change. I want to do better, I just do not know how. The first step is admitting you have a problem, Steve said. The second step is getting help, marriage counseling, individual therapy, whatever it takes to learn how to be a true partner to your wife. Steve turned to Linda. Ma'am, you deserve better than what you have been getting. You deserve a husband who honors your emotions, who creates safety for your vulnerability, who sees your sensitivity as a strength, not a weakness. I hope your husband will become that man, but whether he does or not, you need to know that your feelings are valid. You are not too dramatic. You are not too sensitive. You are perfectly, beautifully human. Linda broke down crying again, but this time David did not laugh. This time he moved toward his wife and wrapped his arms around her, holding her as she sobbed into his chest. It was awkward and uncertain, as if he was learning for the first time how to truly comfort his wife. But he was trying. Their children joined the embrace, creating a family circle of connection and healing. The audience watched in silence, witnessing something profound unfold on what was supposed to be a lighthearted game show. After several minutes, Steve spoke again. We are going to take a break. When we come back, we will continue the game. But I want everyone to remember what really matters here. It is not about points or prizes. It is about how we treat the people we love. During the commercial break, producers connected the Peterson family with counseling resources. Steve spent time talking privately with David about the importance of following through, of doing the real work of change. He also spoke with Linda, encouraging her to stand firm in her needs and to demand the respect she deserved. When the show resumed, the atmosphere was completely different. The game continued, but with a gentleness and mutual support that had been absent before. When Linda answered another question correctly, David smiled at her with genuine pride. When she missed one, he squeezed her hand and said, "That is okay. You are doing great." The Peterson family won the game, and during Fast Money, Linda delivered a strong performance. When they won the $20,000, David turned to his wife first thing and said, "You did that. You were amazing." Linda smiled through fresh tears, but this time they were tears of joy and hope. When the episode aired 7 weeks later, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Mental health professionals praised Steve Harvey for calling out emotional invalidation, a subtle form of abuse that often goes unrecognized. Marriage counselors reported an influx of couples seeking help, many citing the Family Feud episode as their wake-up call. Online support groups formed for people who had experienced emotional invalidation in their relationships. Thousands of people shared their own stories of having their feelings dismissed, of being called too sensitive, of learning to hide their emotions to avoid ridicule. Linda's story resonated because it was universal. The phrase, "you are not too dramatic," became a rallying cry on social media. People posted it as a reminder to themselves and others that all feelings are valid, that sensitivity is not weakness, that emotional expression is human and healthy. 6 months after the episode aired, Family Feud invited the Peterson family back for a follow-up segment. The transformation was visible immediately. Linda carried herself differently, standing taller, speaking with more confidence. David's demeanor had changed as well. The dismissive smirk was gone, replaced by genuine attentiveness to his wife. "We started marriage counseling the week after the show aired," Linda shared during the interview. "It has been hard. We have had to unlearn 23 years of unhealthy patterns, but for the first time in our marriage, I feel like David truly sees me. He creates space for my emotions instead of shutting them down." David spoke candidly about his own journey. "I grew up in a household where emotions were not discussed. My father believed that showing feelings was a sign of weakness. I carried that into my marriage without even realizing it. Therapy has helped me understand that I was not just dismissing Linda's emotions. I was dismissing my own. I was not allowing myself to feel, so I could not allow her to feel either." He turned to his wife. "Linda is not too dramatic. She is authentic. She lets herself feel everything fully, and I have come to see that as a beautiful gift. I am learning to do the same." The children also shared how the experience had impacted them. Jessica talked about how seeing her mother finally stand up for herself had given her courage to set boundaries in her own relationships. Matthew spoke about learning that expressing emotions was masculine and healthy. Ashley said she no longer felt ashamed when she cried. Steve Harvey listened to these updates with visible emotion. "This is why I do what I do, not for the laughs or the ratings, but for moments like this, when we can use this platform to shine a light on real issues and help families heal." The episode became required viewing in psychology and counseling programs. Therapists used it to help clients identify emotional invalidation in their own relationships. Educators incorporated it into curricula about healthy communication and emotional intelligence. 2 years after the original airing, Linda Peterson published a memoir titled Permission to Feel. The book chronicled her journey from emotional suppression to self-advocacy, offering hope and guidance to others trapped in similar patterns. It became a bestseller, resonating with readers who saw their own experiences reflected in her story. In the book, Linda wrote about that moment on Family Feud. "When Steve Harvey froze and looked at my husband, I knew something had shifted. Someone with a platform and a voice was finally seeing what I had lived with for decades. He did not dismiss my tears. He did not tell me I was being dramatic. He validated my right to feel, and in doing so, he gave me permission to reclaim my emotional life." David wrote the foreword to the book, a brutally honest reflection on his own behavior and the journey of change. "I cannot undo the years I spent invalidating my wife's emotions, but I can commit to a different future. I can be the husband she deserves. I can model for my children what it means to honor someone else's feelings. I can continue to do the hard work of growth." The Peterson family became advocates for emotional health in marriage. They spoke at conferences, participated in panel discussions, and shared their story with anyone who would listen. Their message was simple but powerful. Emotional invalidation destroys relationships, but change is possible with commitment and work. 5 years after that January afternoon when a husband laughed at his crying wife, the impact continued to reverberate. The episode remained one of the most powerful moments in Family Feud history, a stark reminder that sometimes entertainment can serve a higher purpose. Steve Harvey reflected on the experience in later interviews. "When I saw David laugh at Linda's tears, I felt physically ill. It was such a violation of trust, of intimacy, of basic human decency. I knew I had to say something. I could not let that moment pass without addressing it. He continued, "What people do not realize is that emotional abuse is often invisible to everyone except the person experiencing it." Linda had been telling David for years that his behavior hurt her, but he did not want to hear it. It took someone outside the relationship, someone with no stake in protecting the status quo, to finally break through. That is why we have to speak up when we see emotional invalidation happening. Silence enables abuse. The moment when Steve Harvey froze became a cultural reference point for emotional invalidation. When someone dismissed another person's feelings, people would reference that Family Feud episode. It became shorthand for recognizing and refusing to tolerate emotional abuse. As this powerful story draws to a close, the lessons remain as urgent as ever. Everyone has the right to feel their emotions without shame or ridicule. Sensitivity is not weakness. Tears are not drama. Emotional expression is healthy and human, and anyone who makes you feel otherwise is not creating safety. They are creating harm. If this story moved you, if you have experienced emotional invalidation in your own life, or if you believe that all feelings deserve respect, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because the message Steve Harvey delivered that day is one we must never forget. You are not too sensitive. You are not too dramatic. You are not too emotional. You are human, and your feelings matter. When David Peterson laughed at his crying wife, he revealed a pattern of emotional abuse that had been hidden for decades. When Steve Harvey froze, then spoke up, he gave Linda Peterson something she had been denied for 23 years. He gave her validation. And in that validation, he gave her the courage to demand better, to expect better, to create a relationship where all of her humanity was honored. That is the power of seeing someone, truly seeing them, and refusing to look away.